opportunity.
We're grateful for your time. It's been busy for you. You know, you've served 37 years in the military. I guess retired as Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. But in some respects, your service only continued when you retired. And now as chairman of the Institute of Study of War and serving on commissions, looking at national defense strategy and a variety of other things, being on Fox as a national security analyst. I mean, there is no shortage of topics to discuss. Today, we want to discuss your take on Israel's strike on the Iranian nuclear weapon program, this analysis of how they're doing, and sort of added your view to discussion of how the United States should support its ally Israel, and the question as we record right now, whether the United States should actually engage in the strike to take out Iran's nuclear weapons program. Maybe we start, General Keane, with your assessment of what's happened to date, and we're recording as of June 18th, where Israel continues to just carry out its campaign, taking out all the elements of the Iranian nuclear weapons program.
Yeah, well, I think when you put everything in the context of October the 7th, when Hamas had some tactical success, obviously, in conducting, from their perspective, a very successful tactical operation, because they're able to surprise the Israelis and take 250 hostages and kill 1,200 people in a barbaric and brutal and just disgusting way. But it seems to be what Iran was trying to organize, and we know now they really did want Hezbollah in this and the Houthis in it, and for problems they had, they did not participate in a timely manner. But when you look back on it, from October the 7th to now, it's really strategic failure. Because look at the consequences of this are absolutely stunning. I mean, Hamas is no longer an effective military organization. They've recruited thousands of teenagers now to compensate for the loss of so many of their foot soldiers. They don't have even the middle grade leaders they used to have, much less the top grade. I'm not suggesting they don't need to be dealt with, they do.
Right.
But they're not formidable anymore. And the idea that they could conduct another attack in the near term is off the table. But most stunning of all is Hezbollah. Yeah. My God. I mean, Roger, look at this. Iran financed this organization going back into the early 80s. And their forerunners, they took down the 241 Marines. They blew up the Kuwait and Lebanon embassies, killing hundreds of Americans and others who worked there. The Khobar Towers in the 90s killed several hundred with focused IEDs, Americans in the Iraq War. And some people, like Lloyd Austin, the last general we had, thinks it's closer to 2,000. And the Iranian proxies conducted 350 attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria, all during the Biden administration, both prior to October the 7th and after it. So what Iran has been up to is stunning, but what has happened since is nothing short of remarkable. Here we have Hezbollah shut down. And the reason why Iran organized Hezbollah primarily was not just for terrorism, was to defend Iran against Israel. Yep. 150,000 rockets organized as a military organization. The most formidable extremist organization in the world, exceeds the capability of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. Nothing short of remarkable. Now comes the time for them to defend Israel. For the first time, Israel is truly at war with Iran, and they're supposed to defend Iran against Israel. They haven't fired a shot.
Well, you know, the Ayatollah, or actually say it was, I think it was Iran's foreign minister was saying, well, listen, if the U.S. gets involved in this conflict, then Iran will unleash Hezbollah. And that's sort of, I mean, as you're pointing out, it doesn't mean much right now, given what Israel's done to Hezbollah, their leadership and their military capability. I mean, that's not something it means something entirely different where we are right now.
The consequences of what has happened is stunning. So now we're at war, Israel is, and they're taking down their ballistic missile program, and eventually they'll preserve some of that. They won't fire everything at Israel, so they'll preserve a few hundred of those for sure. But you can see every single day the amount of ballistic missiles being fired at Israel is going down, and they are just systematically and deliberately taking apart this huge nuclear complex that the Iranians have. And believe me, the reason why it's so comprehensive and so complex is the redundancy and resiliency that the Iranians put in it. Roger, they designed this thing so that it can absorb an attack and survive. That was their going in conviction that at some point they were going to be attacked.
Redundancy and resiliency was what drove them as they built out the program, anticipating the attack. And here we are, 6 days into this at the time of recording. What's your assessment? I mean, if just what you're seeing from ISW and your other sources. Obviously, everybody seems to call you for advice, and they're sharing information with you. What's your battle damage assessment of the Iranian nuclear weapons program as it stands today, again, as we record here?
Well, after 5-6 days, we've got more than half of the nuclear program destroyed. It's systematically, some of these things, like Natanz, because they do have some underground capability there and a very huge on-the-surface capability, has taken, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen plus attacks on it, to kind of render that facility ineffective. So there's no doubt that the Israelis are going to be able to destroy the overwhelming majority of this. And of course, the thing we're all talking about for the last couple of days is Fordow, and the Iranians have that, as a safeguard. They built this thing 300 feet underneath a mountain with the capability, with enriched uranium and enough centrifuges to really make multiple nuclear weapons just at that site alone. So this is their safe gap measure that they put in place, assuming that the Israelis may not be able to do this successfully. And I think they do have a couple of options. We can discuss that.
Yeah, well, I want to go there. It really, in some ways, gets to the heart of the debate now, as you note. And I'm always pestering you. Our listeners and viewers may not know that, but I always turn to you for your insight and analysis. And this was a question I was eager to raise with you for this conversation. Is it possible that Prime Minister Netanyahu would have green-lighted this operation without Israel having its own sort of individual unilateral approach to destroying Fordow? Or do you think he would have taken this on with that left as an unknown in terms of, hey, we're not sure we can do this, but we hope to get the Americans to do it for us? I mean, I just can't imagine that. I'll give you my view, and I'd love for you to react, that Prime Minister Netanyahu would launch this without Israel having its own approach to destroying Fordow.
There is no doubt that they have a plan for Fordow. They certainly want the U.S. to help finish this thing. But yeah, they have a plan in the event the U.S. Would not do it. And I think that would be a huge strategic mistake. And I know you agree, we can come back to it. But what kind of options are available to the Israelis?
Yeah.
Well, first would be a ground raid to secure the facility, and then to systematically go about, blowing it up, and they can, crack the ceiling, undermine the walls, have it, collapse in on itself. That, and this is going to take some time to achieve all of that, and so getting in there, inserting the force, and getting in undetected. Once they're in the area and have to fire a shot at somebody, then they obviously, the Iranians know they're there, and they likely have a quick reaction force of something pretty close. Hopefully the Israelis are aware of that, and they destroy that once they're on the site, they're simultaneously hitting that as well as the site. But nonetheless, let's assume the quick reaction force is not destroyed. So the Israelis have significant amount of risk getting in, taking time to blow up the facility, and then having to extract and get out and survive it.
Yeah,
that's
high risk.
A lot of risk. The other thing they can do is they did this at Natanz. Covert operation. They destroyed a lot of the centrifuges, but not directly. It was indirectly. They took down the power grid and the ventilation system that kept the centrifuges going. The centrifuges have to spin. And when the power grid shuts them down, they're damaged to the point where they're not recoverable. So, I mean, I find this to be quite amazing, but the research we have done to date says that would be a viable option dealing with Ferdowd if they haven't already done some of this. In terms
and research, are you referring to the Institute of Study of War or that and other sources?
Multiple sources.
Got it.
And I can't disclose some of them. But the reality is that I find it hard to believe that if the Iranians invested so much in that facility and the power grid is accessible externally and the ventilation system is, that they don't have an internal generator that's going to keep that facility.
Yeah, you would never allow for a single point of failure like that, right? So,
I've been told more than once that this indeed is the case. I still don't believe it because it just doesn't make any sense to me. But that was true in Natanz, all right?
Right.
And that's how they were able to do that kind of damage. Now, Natanz, their underground portion of the complex, most of it's surface. The underground portion is nowhere near as deep as the 300 feet that the Ferdowd facility is in. So there are some options associated with this, but those options are clearly much more challenging than using the so-called...
One other one that people have talked about, sort of was the first option when I think about Israel doing this on its own, kind of comes to mind, is air superiority. That is, Israel's air superiority is what many never expected to happen. Of course, since Israel's taking out of Iranian air defenses in October, it's allowed this operation to take place. And that's kind of benefited Israel in multiple ways. But one way it would benefit as it relates to Ferdowd, I would think, is just to give them multiple runs. That is, the Israeli Air Force, the ability just to continue dropping its ordnance over and over and over again over the space of days and maybe weeks to realize the effects that one or two mops might offer should the United States get into the conflict. Is that a kind of a sound option too, or is it the sort of thing that, irrespective of how many, 2,000, 5,000, however many pound bombs Israel can carry with its Air Force, it still won't have the cumulative effect of a mop?
Yeah, I think the latter is the case. I mean, I haven't done any analysis of that, and nor the people that are around me have done that analysis, what the cumulative effect of, conventional bombs would be. Obviously able to go maybe a little deeper each time.
Right.
Is theory there. I don't know the answer to that, but certainly the Israelis have that answer. And the fact that they do want the United States to use their MOP capability tells me that, that there's not a lot of certainty associated with that.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to how you think about and frame the decision for the president, would frame the decision for the president of the United States in terms of whether or not to get involved and to finish off destroying the Iranian nuclear weapons program. But before I go there with you, General Keane, I think President Trump has done something hugely significant already that has had a strategic impact to the benefit of the United States of America. And that is, he is the first president to allow or not get in the way of, not prevent, an Israeli prime minister to take out a nuclear program. President George W. Bush, huge supporter of Israel, still did not support Prime Minister Olmert doing this. And then Prime Minister Begin, of course, didn't ask permission from President Reagan when Israel took out the reactor in Iraq, in Osirak, but still came out afterwards, and the Reagan administration was opposed. Here, President Trump clearly was aware of the operation and didn't stop it. And that, I think, has accrued to the benefit of the U.S. national interest. Even if it all would have stopped, it stopped today.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with that. But also, President Trump has the benefit, and not in a positive sense, of the history of Iran's aggressiveness and malign behavior in the region, and what they have done. So and they've proven themselves, to be diabolic. And I think all of us have come to the conclusion, and certainly President Trump has, and that's the key actor here from the United States perspective, that if they had a problem, they would use it. And watching this behavior for 45 years, and the fact that they've said that every year, certainly is a factor here. And I think there's another factor, for America in this. I mean, other than obviously helping our closest ally in the region, also providing deterrence against China and Russia and their behavior. I mean, we got a lot of skin in this game. I mean, the Iranians operationalized their proxies to blow up the Marine barracks in the early 80s, 241 casualties. In the same year, the U.S. embassies in Lebanon and Kuwait. Years later, Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia.
It's rich with history of targeting U.S. military, U.S. persons, and U.S. interests.
It's absolutely stunning. And
you and I met during the Iraq War, General Keane. I mean, that's why when I was on the Armed Services Committee staff, and you come in and testify before the Armed Services Committee. No one did it better than you. No one was able to make our elected officials understand what was at stake and sort of explain what was happening on the ground. You did that for presidents. You did it for members of Congress. But during that war in southern Iraq, the Iranians were targeting our troops and killed our troops. And you actually see this on social media now. Many veterans are saying, "Hey, this is personal. My buddies were killed as a result of Iran in southern Iraq."
Yeah, I mean, the official number for our audience, the Iranian engineers and scientists developed an advanced IED, not these homemade explosive devices that were blowing up vehicles, tactical vehicles driving down roads or in towns and villages. This is an advanced IED that would kill a tank, an M1 Abrams tank, or a major armor fighting vehicle like a Bradley. I had a guy take me into his motor pool who had a heavy armored brigade there, and he showed me a boneyard of M1 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles that were destroyed by these advanced IEDs. So they could penetrate anything on the battlefield, designed and with the mission, and they told them, do not waste this munition on the Iraqi security forces, and certainly not on civilians. These are only for Americans. The official number is over 600. Wow. General Lloyd Austin, the last commander in Iraq, I asked him that question. How many guys do you think really were killed by these advanced IEDs? He said, I don't believe the official numbers. I think it's closer to 2,000.
He's a former Secretary of Defense.
Former Secretary of Defense, former commander in Iraq, former commander at Central Command. And then, in the last 4 years, they have attacked Iraq and Syria U.S. presence in bases in both of those countries close to 350 times. So we have skin in the game here, and I think that's a backdrop, to the president's decision. That doesn't really get stated very often.
No, I'm glad you outlined it. It kind of gives the detail to something Senator Tom Cotton, who you and I know well, has said recently. And as you're fully aware, there are voices, particularly within the Republican Party, that come from the isolationist camp, and they tend to talk about this in terms of we want to avoid an endless war, no more endless wars. And Senator Tom Cotton's response has been, well, the endless wars started by the revolutionary regime in Iran, and they've been engaged in this endless war since 1979. And you just gave a whole bunch of detail explaining, what Senator Cotton's talking about, and it's led to the loss of many hundreds, and as you're telling about Secretary Austin, thousands of American lives. So with all that backdrop, General Keane, President Trump's got a decision to make. How would you sort of present the decision to him when he calls you up? He tends to call you up. So how do you present it to him?
Well, I think the way it would likely get presented to him by policy people as to what are the options and why. Why should the United States get involved directly here from a policy perspective? And I think they're pretty clear and pretty obvious in terms of helping Israel, nuclear weapon, we can't have them have it. And the elephant in the room when you're making that is the president's own unequivocal declaration. No president has said it as frequently, and no one has said it as strongly as he had, that Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon. And Fordow allows them to have a nuclear weapon. That's the reality of it.
Those are his words.
Yeah, and that's the elephant in the room. And no one has to say that. But I think they'll get into the other reasons. One, Israel wants us to help, and they are our closest ally in the region. Two, we have the capability. We don't know what the effects are going to be in attacking a mountain that's a mountain of rock that's 300 feet above the facility itself. I mean, this was designed to go into a concrete facility that's been reinforced. And what I've been told from an engineer perspective, that the cement structure is actually more favorable because it helps to focus the blast downward. And the rock in the mountains dissipate some of the blast a little bit. Interesting.
So you're talking right now about if the United States were to drop the MOP, the massive ordnance penetrator,
it's
been tested with this kind of layers of concrete, and it's been shown to be effective with that sort of testing, but it's sort of different when you're dropping it on a mountain.
Yeah, so I think the policy people, why should we do this? Then in comes the military people in terms of here are our options.
Right.
One of the options for us, I don't think it would get serious consideration, is the same one that the Israelis have. We could take physical control of it and destroy it. But, a lot of inherent risk in that in terms of boots on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the way the military does things like this is they lay down the option, and then they walk the president through the different levels of risk associated with the option itself in terms of conducting the operation successfully, and then they're going to walk him through what does our adversary do in reaction to that operation, and walk the president down through that level of risk. And the obvious one is to our bases and troops in the region. What would their reaction be to that? I mean, and the Iranians, and what is the most likely course of action?
Let's talk about that, because that's getting a lot of play, and those who it's reasonable. It's appropriate for people to ask these questions, for people who are skeptical as to whether or not this is the prudent course for our military, the prudent decision of our government. And so that's, of course, what should be happening in a vibrant democracy. But we should contextualize and understand exactly what we're speaking about. And one of the things that gets put out there is, like, okay, we get involved, we drop this bomb. Two things. One, you break it, you own it. And then two, what you're just hitting on, well, it's going to put our troops in danger. And we see a lot of military assets being deployed. A lot of it looks to me as the sorts of things you would deploy to allow for maximal force protection. So in other words, we have things we can do as a military to ensure that if we are going to take incoming, well, we can handle it. Is that right? And what I imagine that sort of thing you would explain to the president.
Yeah, most of the resources that are being moved into the region are there to help protect our forces, number one, and number two, to conduct counterattacks if the Iranians do attack our forces. So that's principally what is taking place there. And listen, when you're making these decisions, this is the most significant decision the president has made, since he's been returned to office. I mean, certainly he was commended, and rightfully so, to attempt to make peace with Russia and Ukraine, and also to make peace in Gaza, and also with the Iranians and Israel. Mm-hmm. And those were should have been applauded, and they are, and they have been. But we can all see how difficult that is as well. But this is completely different. Why is it different? Because now we got the potential for U.S. troops to be involved here, and the potential threat to them as a result of it. So, there is no. You watch presidents and candidates in campaigns, and you try to translate the effectiveness of that person, how it reveals a person's character, the strength, their values, and, can they govern effectively? But the truth is, you don't really know for sure until the test does come. And I think, and most presidents, not all, but most presidents have had to deal with it. I'm not talking about the execution of domestic programs,
sure,
and building highways and other things that need to be done. And I'm not demeaning the importance of that, or certainly closing our border, which is a national security issue. But all of those domestic programs are important to the quality of life experience for our Americans, and I don't want to undermine that at all. But the real test of a presidency is his ability to protect the American people and to protect our interests overseas. And most presidents, but not all, get tested. And the president was in first time in office, certainly dealing with ISIS, dealing with the Syrians' use of chemical bombs, and dealing with Russia's adventures into Ukraine. And he pushed back on all of those and was commended, for it. And now he has this decision in front of him. And when you're making these decisions, there's always complicated options here, and there's always risk involved. And so I think two things come to the forefront: your own judgment here, and then the second thing, in my words, it requires some spine. Mm-hmm. Because in these options, there's always fear of escalation and fear that our troops are going to be harmed. Or sometimes there's certainty that they're going to be harmed and there's going to be casualties. And that's where the spine comes in making a decision to take control of your fear and do the right thing here for the national interest.
Yeah, and it will be enduring and durable. I mean, that's the upside of this. I mean, right? This is a sort of once in a generation more opportunity.
Yeah, and the consequences of taking Iran, Roger, off the board here, mm-hmm, as the dominating malign actor in the region, are right in front of us. Yeah. What a huge opportunity. All these presidents, but this president has the opportunity to do just that, to reduce their domination in the area. And the Israelis have done most of it. And our contribution here will be critical, but in the course of it, a small part of it. But it's going to be critical in terms of finishing it.
Finishing the job. Yeah. I want to end, because we're coming to the end here of our conversation. General Jack Keane joining us on Reaganism. Perhaps we could conclude this conversation with having you address the other concerns. So one concern is, if the U.S. would get involved, what it might mean in terms of targeting forward deployed forces and other U.S. interests. You hit on that a moment ago. And then there's another concern, which is this is going to bring us into another endless war, forever war. This is going to require boots on the ground in Iran. You break it, you're going to have to fix it. I mean, you're someone who is deep on what counterinsurgency looks like, what sort of a U.S. force presence on the ground sort of operation looks like. we've talked about it. That is not at all the direction you would recommend going. And my words, not yours. This would sort of look like how Lebanon's dealing with the post-Hezbollah or Syria's doing post-Assad. These things are playing out, but they're not playing out with the U.S. sort of rebuilding a country. But give me your response to when President Trump might raise that concern, or anybody else, in terms of getting us into an endless war.
Yeah. Well, these forever wars or endless wars are the reference point for those are in the Middle East, and they're Iraq and Afghanistan. And this couldn't be any further from the truth here. This is not about Iraq and Afghanistan. Both of those wars were choices made by the United States in both cases to change out a regime, to conduct an invasion. To me, it was more like a liberation, but to conduct an invasion, to change a regime, then to occupy the country, and then in both cases to help rebuild the country. The critics call that nation building. But those were major policy decisions. This decision that we're making here with assistant Israel and some kind of retaliation by the Iranians, and then likely a very decisive response from the United States, has nothing to do with a ground invasion of Iran and to take over the country and change out the regime and therefore occupy it till another government takes in place. That's not on the table by anybody. And the people who are critical of us taking this action exaggerate this to try to make their point. And it's a false narrative. And it absolutely has to be seen by that. The idea that Iran would want to go to war with the United States, they may say that.
Right.
It makes no sense. They have a very weak military, and it's getting weaker by the day. Small Navy, frigates, and patrol boats. Air Force, no longer. They had 1970 vintage airplanes before the Israelis arrived on the scene 5 days ago. Yeah. And they've destroyed all of it. It is gone. Their land forces are large, poorly equipped, poorly trained, and poorly led. They would not be consequential. And guess what? The Iranian leadership knows all of this. They know they can't take on Israel, much less the United States.
And the United States is not looking to roll in with their tanks. I mean, I think that's the salient point.
Any place with troops on the ground, other than maybe we would conduct a raid for some reason, and I don't even see that in the offing, to be frank about it. Right. This is just an air power to punish the Iranians if they attack our bases, and it will be very consequential and likely will shut them down like it has done in the past. Because why? Look at the Iranians want the nuclear weapon to preserve their regime. We take that away from them, they still want to preserve what they have left. And the last thing they want to do is get into an exchange with the United States and its air power dominance. That would be a relative disaster for them, and almost for certain the regime would be so weakened after that that there would likely be inevitable that there'll be an internal change of the regime. They want no part of this. And
last question on this, and then we'll let you go, General Keane. Thank you for your time. There's no doubt what Israel's done is creating a vacuum in the country, a security vacuum. It's a weakened regime on their knees. If the U.S. would come in and finish off the nuclear weapons program, certainly that would make it even weaker. The size of the vacuum would increase. It may give an opportunity for their resistance, for their opposition to challenge the regime. It may not. But those are sorts of things that I think from a U.S. policy standpoint, we don't have to determine and we don't have to involve ourselves in if the mission is narrowly tailored toward removing, destroying the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And I think that's really the only question and sort of the framing on the table in terms of what we are seeking to accomplish. I mean, regime change, that may be an outcome of all this, but that is not the sort of thing we are talking about driving at in terms of that is U.S. engagement here.
Well, even the Israelis are not. I mean, if the Israelis really were after that, take a look at what they've done. They decapitated their military leadership and their scientific nuclear leadership, and they haven't laid a glove on their civilian leadership.
Yeah.
That is who is running the country. If they truly want to decapitate the regime, they could take them down. But they likely don't know what's going to replace it. Likely hardliners, for sure. So their aim is not the regime. Their aim is what they said it was. It's the nuclear program and the ballistic missiles that can do harm to them. If the byproduct of all of that pressure so weakens the regime that internally it's changed out, certainly the Israelis would welcome that, and so would the United States, and we'd hope that what was following them would be better.
General Jack Keane,